So welcome everyone to our fourth and final installment in the Michigan Coordinated Eligibility and Enrollment webinar series. Today we're going to spend our time talking about the application for the community of practice. If you've been here before, some of this beginning part will sound familiar, but we'll first start by saying hello. My name is Samantha Gray-Keene. I'm a managing associate here at School Readiness Consulting. I am joined by my partner or my colleagues, Somia, say hi, Somia, and Angela, who has helped us with the other webinars. So just a couple of housekeeping items as we get started. As a reminder, the webinar is being recorded. So that is why videos and mute is automatically, videos are off and mute is already on. Closed captioning is available. You can turn that on by clicking the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen and selecting show subtitles. We will go over a large amount of content today, also being sure to provide enough time at the end for you all to ask questions. But remember, you can use the chat along the way. Somia will be monitoring the chat, answering any questions you might have, and also pay attention to the chat. I'll try to cue when she will be sharing some links and things for you all to have to support you through the application process. And as I mentioned, because this is being recorded, we will now be turning off our videos so that we're not a distracting floating set of heads in the recording. Great, so for our time today, we will do just a little bit of setting the context small. We've done a lot of that already in the other webinars, but just want to make sure we're all kind of starting from the same place. We will talk to you a little bit more about the actual community of practice opportunity. We will then walk through the application. And as I said, we want to make sure that we provide ample time for you all to ask any questions that you might have. So again, if you've been with us for any or all of the previous webinars, this first part is going to be very, very familiar. Just as a reminder, the other three webinars are posted on Michigan's OGS PDG B5 website, which is kind of hard to find, but we will put it in the link or in the chat for you here in a little while. So as a reminder, we just want to kind of all ground in what do we mean by coordinated eligibility and enrollment. And as you may or may not be aware, there are a variety of approaches and strategies that can be used in coordinated eligibility and enrollment systems. So on this slide, we see two common approaches and some of the terminology that's used related to those two approaches. So the one on the left is the one-stop shop, and this involves providing a central or single point of entry through which families can access a variety of programs. You might also hear this approach called a single point of entry, centralized access, or referral hub. The other approach is no wrong door, which involves developing processes and systems that link families to the right resources to meet their needs, regardless of which program or service provider the family connects with first. States and communities often use one or both of these approaches when designing coordinated eligibility and enrollment systems, which you will often hear us throughout this and see abbreviated as CEE. While these approaches are important frameworks to use in designing CEE systems, it's important to remember that CEE is grounded in the community context and should be shaped by the families and providers who are interacting with the systems in day-to-day life, and implementing a coordinated approach to how families initially access these services, again, whether it's through a single no wrong door approach, or excuse me, through a no wrong door approach or a single point of entry or some other method, is necessary, but it's not sufficient to just be that only place to begin, right? That's getting families in the door. This framework that we're going to talk about, or that we have been talking about, is really kind of helping families as they go all the way through the systems that they interact with on a daily basis. So why coordinated eligibility enrollment? Why CEE? We know that well-implemented CEE systems help families learn about, choose, and access the early learning programs and services that meet their specific needs and interests through family-centered resources, processes, and supports. Successful CEE systems develop culturally and linguistically responsive materials, tools, and resources that can support diverse families in identifying and enrolling in programs in ways that are relevant to their preferences and experiences. It can also provide a method for analyzing which families are able to access appropriate services and which are not, as well as a way through which those gaps can be addressed. We also know that CEE approaches focus on ensuring that the maximum number of families can benefit from limited resources and that those resources are being utilized to their full extent. This is done by reducing duplication in enrollment, avoiding moving families off of waiting lists into programs with availability, and streamlining administrative processes for families and providers. And finally, we also know that successful CEE approaches require strong collaboration, which is sometimes difficult to foster in a system with limited resources. Engaging community stakeholders in CEE efforts can help break down silos and competition between providers, generating more effective approaches to service delivery that can generate improved outcomes for families. We have in past webinars, as I mentioned, really dug into the components and what we learned, the components of the framework, excuse me, and kind of what we have learned along the way. And we encourage you to review the full landscape and the executive summary. So now I'm going to move on to what is the actual opportunity that we're talking about today. So as I mentioned, part of what we had done through our landscaping was try to gather everything that we found and put it into a framework that would help folks kind of understand what coordinated eligibility and enrollment means in Michigan. So this framework presents a way for the state and for communities to approach coordinated eligibility and enrollment work in a comprehensive way that engages families through the early years and across systems, while also promoting the equitable and effective allocation of resources. So this community of practice opportunity is designed to support locally driven, community-based efforts in alignment to this framework, which represents key components of CEE that are central to creating family-centered, equitable systems. So we have kind of these three components, which we've talked about in the past. Again, if you really want to learn more about them, we suggest going to the landscape or reading or watching the webinars that we'd already conducted. But the framework has three components. So you have these outside pieces, the dotted outer circle, which are foundational principles of coordinated eligibility enrollment. So that's relationship-based, coordinated and aligned, equitable and family-centered. And then in that blue, kind of light blue middle circle, these are the areas where state policy can best support local CEE efforts. So things like creating a shared vision, supports with data collection and use, helping to build local capacity and allocation of resources. And then you have in the kind of flower middle section there, these are the successful, or the key elements, excuse me, that help create a successful CEE system. So making or helping families become aware of resources, helping families select resources, helping families kind of as they go through the process of receiving services and connection between resources. And as we've noted in the past, all of these components are centered around families who are the focus and primary drivers of all CEE efforts. So in this community of practice, 8 virtual learning sessions will happen. There will be a selection of a cohort, again, of 8 community teams to participate in this community of practice. Community teams will have the opportunity to learn from each other and from other, to learn from other members of the cohort, as well as refine their own local CEE efforts and approaches. The virtual COP sessions, again, community of practice, you will also hear us refer to as COP. The virtual COP sessions will provide participants with the opportunity to share best practices and problem solve, to take a deeper dive into implementation through the toolkit or guide that we shared in webinar 3, and then to provide input to the state on supporting local CEE efforts. The communities will also receive one-on-one support from an assigned TA provider and regular newsletters that will share information and community spotlights between sessions. Selected communities will also receive funding to support their efforts in alignment with the framework. And these activities need to take place between February 2022 and December 2022. And we'll talk a little bit more about the funding and the technical assistance specifically at the end, just so you're aware. So to be clear, this opportunity, because it is time bound and resources are limited to the PDG V5 timeline, as you'll see here, the outcomes are really about connecting families and communities, connecting families to each other for long-term support and guidance to help build local capacity to continue efforts beyond the length of the COP and to help the state better understand how to best support communities in implementing locally driven CEE efforts. Sounds like a great opportunity, you say? You're right. So now you're probably wondering, how do I apply? So Soumya will add, she's going to now add a link to the chat for the online and PDF version of the application. So that will be there for you as well. So I'll give a second for her to do that. And then what we will do is walk through each of the components, the key components of the application. I will pause at the end of this to ask any general questions. And before we go into the funding, I pause again, and then again, we'll open it up generally for questions at the very, very end. So the application begins with the opportunity to help the state understand who, both in your community writ large and for the purpose of this opportunity, will be part of your team. So who will function as the primary point of contact? This is the person to whom we should direct any questions, who will also kind of lead this effort, whether it be, this person doesn't have to be maybe the head of any kind of agency or organization, but just the person with whom we should have regular contact with as part of the COP, and maybe will lead this particular effort for you. The fiscal agent, we would like to know who the fiscal agent is. Can be the same as the primary point of contact or not, but we need to know who to send the funds to, who will be responsible for the distribution and monitoring at the local level. And this will also be the same person / agency responsible for submitting a final budget and supporting documentation at the end of the project. And just to note, you might have questions about this, but once teams are selected, we will then provide all the necessary forms and processes around the budget, but just want to name that. And then we want to know who is kind of part of your leadership team. We recognize that many communities are already doing this work, already have teams built. Sometimes we've seen teams as large as 15, 20, 25 people that are kind of there in your communities working on this. And we recognize, again, having a COP with 8 communities times 25 people is just unwieldy. So what we are asking for the purpose of this effort is that you identify a leadership team. So who are the 3, maybe 4 people who have the capacity and the interest to attend the COPs, to participate in the TA calls, to kind of be a conduit between the community and the community team and the COP, and potentially sharing learnings with the state, etc. So we want to know that. And then we just do want to get an idea, again, if you do have a larger community planning team, who is a part of that. The next section of the application asks you to paint a picture of your community. We did not want to define what community means. In all honesty, we had lots of conversation about what does it mean? What does community mean? Is that a neighborhood? Is it a school district? Is it a county? Like, what does it mean? And we decided that it wasn't important for us to define that, but to allow you to tell us what you mean by community, recognizing that some folks are working across county and school district lines, for example. So you'll just tell us a little bit about how you're defining community. We then want to learn a little bit more about the demographic characteristics of your community. In the application, we have included some resources to help you share that information. These examples listed here are just that, examples. It is just a snapshot to help us understand more about the children and families that you are all working with. And then finally, we would like to know where you are in the process. I think in one of the last webinars, someone had kind of asked this question. We really are looking to create a cohort of folks that might just be starting to work on CEE initiatives and efforts and projects in their community. We also would like to look for people who are kind of midstream and looking to maybe refine or adjust. We are also looking for folks who have kind of been doing this for a long time and have lots to share. So we really are looking for people at all levels of implementation, or communities, excuse me, at all levels of implementation. The next part is really the meat of the application. We want to make you aware of the fact that you have a 250 word limit for each of the questions. So we're looking for, concise explanations. You don't have to write, it's not a 50-page strategic plan. We would just like to know some of the high level details. And just also as a reminder that the content of the COP is based on the framework and the CEE Planning and Implementation Guide, aka Toolkit, that we shared last week. So again, recognizing that communities are at various levels of implementation, we are asking communities to identify a single topic or challenge that your team will focus on over the course of this COP. That does not mean that you will put all efforts on hold, especially since so many strategies are interrelated, but we really would like to learn more about what it is that you think your community would like to work on over the course of the next year, and how kind of the learnings from the COP can be applied, how the funds can be used to support that, etc. So again, you're going to select, it could be your highest priority, it could just be the next thing that your community was beginning to tackle, but we would like you to identify one kind of area, topic, challenge, etc., that you'll focus on for the purpose of this COP. And so we just are going to want to know a little bit more about that. So what are you hoping to address? How do you know that it's a challenge in your community? And then we want to know a little bit more about how you plan to approach it. And we're asking you to think about your approach as it relates to those key principles in the framework. So we want to know how your approach is family-centered, relationship-based, equitable, coordinated, and aligned. So for example, we have questions in the application that we want you to consider. So how can or have families and programs and service providers been engaged to inform the work? How will you incorporate family voice and choice? When we think about relationship-based, we want to know how can you ensure that families, providers, and other community stakeholders have access to the information they need and are supported to work together to address needs and explore solutions? How can you address issues of equity? What topics related to language, race, ethnicity, economic diversity have or can you address? And then coordinated and aligned. How can you support coordination and collaboration across agencies and provider types? What collaborative structures related to helping children and families are currently in place and could be leveraged to support your CEE efforts? I want to pause there for just 1 second and make sure that there are any questions that haven't been addressed in the chat. Somia, I will lean on you to know if there's anything that we need to address, or folks, if you have another question and you want to pop that in the chat before I go into the funding portion.
I think we're good on questions right now.
Thank you. Okay, continue to pop those in the chat if you have them. And again, we'll pause at the very, very end for question and answers. So as we mentioned, awardees will receive up to $30,000 to implement locally developed strategies aligned with one or more of the CEE components. The funds will be distributed in one lump sum in February of 2022 and must be expended by the end of the year. Potential activities include convening community working groups or listening sessions to address CEE priorities and issues. Maybe, as I mentioned before, you need to launch or build out a specific activity related to CEE. We've been learning a lot about people building data systems or trying to create a centralized intake form, things like that. Maybe you want to develop or curate shared professional development related to CEE activities. And we've been hearing people talk about those types of efforts, getting to know the resources and providers available in your community, things like that. Or maybe you want to conduct a community-wide needs assessment or asset mapping to better understand the CEE landscape in your community. A couple of things that we want to point out. Again, recognizing the many and varied ways communities are helping families become aware of, access, and help shape the services in their communities. How the funds are leveraged and drive change in your community, or it's kind of wide open. I know folks really would like to hear, like, you can do these 3 things and not these 3 things. We do know a few things, right? We know that these funds may not be used for slots or seats in programs. This funding is limited to this year, and that is not a sustainable strategy to add additional seats in your community. We also know that federal dollars may not be used to purchase food items. When it comes to hiring, I want to offer a little bit of clarity here. This is a little bit more nuanced. Just as this funding is not a sustainable way to add more program seats in a community, it's also not a way to bring on a new staff member. However, funds may be used to expand the capacity or FTE of a current staff member. So maybe you have a part-time employee or even a family member who could add 5 or 10 hours a week over the course of the project or something like that to lead the work, or maybe take on the oversight of a particular activity. Because it is nearly impossible to name every activity that may or may not be allowable, we strongly encourage you to reach out over the next 2 weeks via email or during the open office hours, which we'll talk about, to discuss your questions about the budget. So I just want to be clear again that the state is pretty open and to being flexible. The challenge is making sure that your decision on how to use the funds is aligned to the challenge that you present, or the problem that you present in the earlier sections, and how you plan to approach it, and then with an eye towards sustainability. Is this something where these funds help fill a gap, help create some momentum, things like that, but not something that once these funds go away, you're all going to have to be scrambling to kind of find that $30,000 again for the next year, if that makes any kind of sense. I know it's nuanced and can be a little gray there. So again, encouraging you to reach out over the next 2 weeks via email or open office hours. We also want to note that in this section, the goal is not a detailed budget narrative. There is no specific template that you need to submit how you plan to use the funding. It is really about kind of broad brushstrokes around, approximately this amount of money for this activity, approximately this amount of money for that activity. And to understand what resources may already exist in your communities, whether that's financial, human, or in kind. And then also kind of what you're thinking about in terms of how will we sustain this effort when the money isn't there any longer. So I'm going to pause just again, because I know there's typically lots of questions. So I see, could you provide stipends to families? Yes. Theoretically, again, as long as whatever you're providing a stipend for aligns with the work that you're doing, but yes. Any other questions about that? I know it's a lot to process and think about, and we'll pause again at the end. I just want to make sure we catch anything immediate. Okay. I don't think maybe you did already, Somi, I'm not sure, but she will either way. We want to talk a little bit about the selection process. We're not trying to keep it a secret. The rubric is included in the application. Somi is going to drop it in the chat if she hasn't already. We want to be clear again about a couple of things, that the selection process is focused on equity and is designed to support the identification of a strong cohort representing the diversity of communities across the state. The process recognizes and considers the various stages of development communities may be in undertaking local CEE systems building efforts, and seeks to create a cohort that brings a diversity of experience, resources, structure, and need to the work. So what this means is likely that it will not be just the top 8 scoring communities who are selected. Your application score will be considered, and then all of that other information that we talked about in the beginning, such as the composition of your community team, your geographic location, the demographics of your community, the level of implementation, et cetera, will also be taken into consideration as selections are made. And just a couple, again, key things. The tell us about your team section, tell us about your community. Those, and the budget section also, and the assurances, if you look at the kind of first and third bullets, those are all based on you answered it or you didn't, and just trying to get a little incentive to get people to complete the application in full. But those are either you get points for answering, no points for not answering. But to tell us about your your plan, your CEE plan. Again, that if you look in the rubric, there's some pretty specific examples of how points will be assigned there. And then, sorry, I want to make sure the timeline. I'm sure you're interested in the timeline. As you are aware, the application has been released. And again, Somi is going to give you a couple of different things. You should have gotten the link to the applications, the rubrics. We're also going to give you right now the link to schedule the open office hours and our email, just in case you need that. But the application was released on October 26th. It's out there and ready to go. You can, again, access that via online, or we share a PDF version. Today is the informational webinar. Over the next 2 weeks, we will be offering open office hours. And again, wanting to offer a little bit of guidance and clarity around this. So open office hours is an opportunity to have high-level questions about the application answered. You can schedule in 15-minute segments. It is not intended to support applicants in drafting or editing your responses. So as we discussed earlier, maybe you want to be sure that your planned approach or activities contain allowable expenditures. Perfect topic for a call or an email. Maybe you have questions about the COP itself that you would like answered to help you determine if your community has the capacity or desire to apply or participate. Again, good topic for a call or an email. Maybe you're having trouble getting your responses down to the 250 word limit and need some thought partnership. Not a good topic for a call or email. We cannot offer that type of technical assistance. We just want to be clear, we can help answer general questions about the application, the process, the COP, things like that. But in terms of helping you actually draft your responses, not that kind of TA. So again, just this opportunity to have your high-level questions answered. As a reminder, looking to the landscape or watching webinars 1 and 2 in particular will help you better understand the framework and the components thereof to help you align your efforts to that framework. You can also look to the rubric. Again, the rubric for that middle section, tell us about your CEE plan. They're pretty specific and can help you kind of get aligned to what it is that, how your application will be scored. And then again, if you feel like, well, I still have some questions, perfectly fine. That's why we're here. So that's your chance to engage in some of this TA through open office hours or email. As a reminder, applications are due November 26th. If you're submitting via the PDF version, please use the mi_CEE@schoolreadinessconsulting.com email to do so. We'll have that up again at the end. And I think Somia is adding that to the link to the chat as well. But you should submit if you're using the PDF version to that email. Otherwise, when you fill it out online, we will get notification. Just note too that during the review process, teams may reach out to ask clarifying questions as needed. And then the selected communities will be notified early in January. So now we're going to open it up to questions. Please try to focus your questions on topics that are relevant to everyone. If you have a specific question, we're happy to talk to you about it. As it relates to the content of your application, we simply encourage you to schedule a conversation during open office hours or to send us an email.
Samantha, this is Angela. We did get a question in the chat a little earlier about paying for advertising or marketing efforts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, again, theoretically, yes, having an understanding of kind of what that looks like, how it applies, why that's important to your community, as long as all of those pieces kind of fit together, then that would be an allowable expense. I know that there's a lot of information, a lot to process, but again, I'm going to pause and make sure folks don't have any questions. I'm going to stop sharing for just a minute and come off of video, so maybe it'll be a little more personable. Sherry asked if we are not accepted, we still have access to the toolkit. That is correct. The toolkit will be made available to everyone across the state. While folks are thinking, Soumya, do you want to add anything about what will actually happen during the community of practice?
Sure. So obviously, I know everyone will be focused on the application until it's due. And what we plan to do in early 2022 is do a kickoff meeting, I think in February, with the selected communities. And we plan to do a detailed, customized TA needs assessment with each community team. So that will really help us give direction and, you know, a sense of what the real TA needs are of the participants of the COP. So we are planning, of course, 8 sessions, and we have a rough sketch of what we want to focus on, and it will, of course, be heavily drawn from the framework that's found in your materials and the executive summary materials, and really the applications themselves. So a lot of the content you'll be able to access is both through peer dialogue, peer-to-peer learning will be a main attraction of the COP series, but we'll also be able to do some targeted content development, individual phone calls with teams. So you'll have access to a TA lead that can get to know your team and understand your unique needs and really customize that technical assistance to what you need. I think also we'll be producing newsletters that will kind of summarize what we're learning as the COP moves forward in its work over the course of the year. So those will be good documents to kind of reflect and share learnings between community teams over the course of the COP series. I think those are the highlights.
Thank you, Soumya. We want to be clear, like we do, and really want this to be a community of practice. This isn't, you know, professional development in the sense of like a sit and get, right? We're not going to be kind of trying to quote unquote teach you things. We are curating resources that are based on your needs. We are setting up situations where you all can learn from each other and other folks kind of doing this work. So thank you for that overview. Any other questions? Okay, we'll still keep thinking, but as a reminder, if you do happen to have any questions, please feel free to reach out via this email. Some folks already have, so great, thank you so much. And then I think again, Soumya plopped the link to the open office hours in the chat. It's also in the application. Where you can book a time with one of us to kind of talk through things again in 15-minute increments. Oh, well, Sherry had a question. Yes, if you are just getting started, yes, you can just, again, for the purpose of the application, please, focus on a single topic that you would want to leverage, you know, moving that forward through this community of practice, recognizing that you will still be doing other things, that these things don't happen in isolation, but we didn't want to force everyone to tell us about all the many and varied things that you may be doing. But yeah, just to kind of focus on one thing for the purpose, again, of the application and the COP. And then Soumya just added we've added lots of links for you, but if you go to the NDE PDG, lots of letters website that Soumya just shared, they have everything is posted there, the first 3 webinars, the landscape, the executive summary, and the application, and then the email, that MICEE email are all there as well in one place. And thank you, Soumya also just added how to sign up for open office hours, again, linked in the application as well. Again, thank you all for your time. We also want to thank the Office of Great Starts for making this possible. And for those of you who have attended all 4 webinars, thank you so much for your enthusiasm and sharing all of the things that you're currently working on. And we encourage everyone to apply, no matter where you are, again, no matter where you are in the process. Sorry, I got distracted by the question in the chat. Yeah, yes, Sherry, yes. We have several folks that have talked to us about trying to develop databases or websites as well. I think the key to remember before folks sign off is really this, again, this idea of connecting all of the dots, right? So we have this framework. What is the challenge? You clearly defining the challenge for us in your community, how you know it is a challenge, how that aligns to the framework, and then how the funds support that. So theoretically, yes, developing a website or a database is an allowable expenditure as long as that through line is pretty clear, right? As long as we can see how it's all connected, then yes, that would be an example of an allowable expense. All right, well, thank you all so much for joining us for our 4th and final, and we look forward to seeing you in open office hours, responding via email, and reviewing all of your applications. Have a great day.